of city, right, which was held in the hand of a council, which consisted of the president of the city corporation, chief representative of the guild of merchants, a representative of the artisans, and the chief accountant. If you compare the administration of the city of Mauryas, right, and administration of the city of the Guptas, then you will come to know that under Mauryas, the city committee was always appointed by the Mauryas, that is by the Maurya government. But in Guptas, it was comprised of the local representatives. So you can say that the decentralization of administration authority began during Gupta period. Right. So decentralization of the administration authority began during the Gupta period. And during the Gupta period, the village headman became more important than before. Right. So before that, the headman of a village was not that much important, as much as it was important in the or during the Gupta period. So the Gupta military organization was feudal by character. Right. Feudal by character. That is what, though the empire had a large standing army. Right. So then the Gupta period, for the first time, in the Gupta period, for the first time, civil and criminal laws were clearly defined and demarcated. Right. So civil and criminal laws were clearly defined and demarcated. Gupta kings depended primarily on land revenue, which was varying from 1/4 to 1/6 of the actual produce. Right. Again, the same kind of revenue was generated during Mauryas as well, which was also varying from 1/4 to 1/6 of the produce. In Gupta period, the army was to be fed by the people. So whenever it passed through the countryside, so this tax was called as Sena Bhakta. Right. So during Gupta period, army was to be fed by the people whenever it passed through the countryside. And such kind of tax is known as Sena Bhakta. The villagers were also subjected to forced labor called Vishti, right, in order to serve into a royal army as well as into the officials. Right. So the villagers were subjected to forced labor. And what they were working as Vishti for royal army or in the officials. So Gupta period experienced an excess of land grants. Right. Gupta period also experienced an excess of land grants. So the land grants included the transfer of royal rights over salt and mines, which were under the royal monopoly during Maurya period. Right. So Mauryans have kept the royal rights over the salt and mines. Right. So here the land grants had been included to transfer. Right. So this is what the administration of the Guptas is concerned. Right. So highly decentralized administration. Highly decentralized administration. Right. Comprise network of, right, what this administration comprised. Right. So comprised local network, right, put this word of comprise network of self-governing tribes and tributary kingdoms. Tributary kingdoms. Right. So the chiefs of these served as representatives of imperial power. Representatives of imperial powers. Right. Means what? Whatever may be the chiefs of the tributary kingdom and self-governing tribes, right, will be the representatives of the king, right? That is what imperial powers. Right. So Gupta king took titles, right, as Maharaja Dhiraj, Samrat, Ekadhiraja, Chakravarti, right. So all these were befitting, right? All these were befitting their large empire and imperial status. So these names were well fitted because of their large empire and the imperial status, right? If anybody wants, you can. Done. Thank you, Shresh. Right. So these had assumed, the Gupta rulers had assumed different titles which were well fitted. So practice of appointing the crown prince. Right. Came in. Right. So kings were, Gupta kings were assisted by a council of ministers. Right, that is called Mantri Parishad or Mantri Mandala. Right. So Came in. Right. Started. Simply you can write practice of appointing crown prince started. Fine. Now there have been high officers, right? There have been high officers. One is called Kumar Amatya. Kumar Amatya, and another is called as Sandhi, right? Sandhi Vigrahita. Vigrahika, right? Kumar Amatya and Sandhi Vigrahika, right? So Kumar Amatya formed the chief cadre. Chief cadre, right? For what purpose? For recruiting, high officials. Recruiting high officials under the Guptas. So what were selected from this? Right, mantris, then senapatis, right? Mantris, senapatis. You can consider here as the justice of Minister of Justice. At that time, it was called as Mahadandanayaka. Mahadandanayaka. That is Minister of Justice. Then Sandhi Vigrahika, Minister of Peace and War. Right. We'll write it here. Minister of Peace and War. Minister of Peace and, right. So all these were chosen from the chief cadre. Right. So this was the purpose of forming a chief cadre. So here Sandhi Vigrahika, right? Sandhi Vigrahika first appeared under Samudragupta. Under Samudragupta, right? Who was that? Was Harisena. Right? Who was Harisena. Right? Some other important officials. Other important officials were Maha Pratihari, that is called chief of the royal palace. Right. Maha Pratihari. See, as far as questions are concerned, for questions, these names are not that much important. But in order to overall understand the complete point or complete issue or complete event, these words will always help you out. Right. So you should know their meanings. But as far as questions, right, these are of less bother. So Mahapratihari, called chief of royal palace. Second one is Danda Pashika. Danda Pashika, called chief officer of police department. Chief officer of police department. Then next one is Vinay Asti Tishpak. Vinay Asti Tishpak. Vinay Asti Tishpak, right, which is called chief officer of religious affairs. Religious affairs. Then Maha Pilupati. Maha Pilupati. Maha Pilupati, who was called as the chief of Elephant Corps. Chief of Elephant Corps. Chief of Elephant Corps. Right. Maha Ashwapati. Maha Ashwapati, chief of cavalry. Chief of cavalry. Right. So there had been some of the important provinces of Gupta period, and among these you can consider Magadh, Bradhaman, then Pundra Vardhana, Vardhana. Okay, I will write it as Pundra Vardhana, Tirbhukti. Tirbhukti is nothing but Bihar. Eastern Malwa, Western Malwa, and Saurashtra. And Saurashtra. Right. Then the administration unit of province. So administration of province. Right. So province is called as Bhukti or Bhoga. Common name of Bhukti or Bhoga. And that is what? Province. And its head was Uparika. He was also called as Bhogapati. Right. Second one is Vishaya, called district. It is called as district. Right. So Vishaya Pati. It was also called as Ayukta. Ayukta. Third one, Vithika. Vithika. It was also called as Nagar. Right. That is what? City. And its head is called Nagar Pati. Or it was also called as Purapala. Purapala. Right. So if anybody wants, you can. Done? Okay, fine. And the last one is Gram, which is nothing but village. Called, its head is called Gramika. Right, Gramika. So administration of city was in the hand of council. Administration of city in hand of a council. Right, and the council consisted the president of city, president of city corporation, then second one, chief representative of merchants, chief representative of merchants, right, chief representative of merchants, then representative of artisans, of artisans, and chief accountant. Chief accountant. Right. Chief accountant. So always keep in mind the decentralization of administrative authority began in the Gupta period, right? So during Gupta period, village headman became, that is Gramika, village headman became more important than before. So in this Gupta period, right, or during Gupta period, first time civil and criminal law, civil and criminal law were clearly defined, right, and demarcated. Right. The Gupta kings depended on land revenue. Right. So it varied from 1/4 to 1/6 produce of the produce. See, during this during Gupta, army was fed by the people, So whenever it passed through, whenever it passed through the countryside, right? And this tax is called Sena Bhakta. Sena Bhakta. See, during these villagers were subjected to forced labor, right, for serving Royal Army and officials. Royal Army and officials. Fine. So this is what the administration of Guptas is concerned. Fine. Now, obviously, second point you can have here will be the society. How was the society during Gupta period? See, till now we have considered the Varna system. So now in this period, Varna system begins to modify owing to the proliferation of caste. Right. So depending on caste, now the Varna system started modify. Right. This was chiefly due to three factors. There have been three chief factors. Because of that, it had taken this kind of modification. Very first one, a large number of foreigners had been assimilated into Indian society. Primarily they were known as the Kshatriyas. Right. So a large number of foreigners had been assimilated into Indian society. Second is tribal people into Brahmanical society. Now see how the tribal people have become Brahmins. Right. So in earlier period, tribes, Adivasi, they have offered some part of their land to the Brahmins and became the Brahmins. That means they get associated with the Brahmanical society through the grants of the land. Right. So this is what you can always consider. Right. Then third one is the guilds of craftsmen. That is craftsmen. Right. As a part of merchants. So craftsmen were often transformed into caste as a result of the decline of the trade. Right. So later on the trade had been declined. So and then urban centers and the localized characters of the crafts have been declined, and because of that, the into caste. So why in the society the varnas have modified? Then the social positions of the Shudras seems to have improved in this period. Right. So they were permitted to listen the epics and Puranas. Also, they allowed to worship a new god, which was called as Krishna. Right. So Shudras had allowed to worship the Krishna. Right. Then from around century onwards, the practice of untouchability appeared, right, which